They said the old farm was dead, a forgotten patch of dirt left behind by time. But for the girl who inherited it on her 18th birthday, what she discovered behind a strange cellar door wasn't just about the past. It would rewrite her entire future. I stood on the linoleum of the county services building, the soles of my worn-out sneakers sticking slightly with each shift of my weight. The air smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant, the official scent of my entire life up to that point. 18 years, 216 months, 6,574 days if you count the leap years. All of it spent in rooms that smelled like this. Today was the day it was supposed to end. My 18th birthday. Freedom. They called it aging out. It sounded less like a celebration and more like a product expiring on a shelf. If you're new here, maybe you know what it's like to stand on a threshold like that, with nothing behind you that you want to keep and nothing ahead that you can see. If these stories of finding a new path mean something to you, maybe hit that subscribe button. It helps us keep telling them. For me, on that day, freedom felt a lot like being shoved out of a moving car. Ms. Albright, my caseworker for the last 4 years, slid a thick manila envelope across the gray melamine desk. Her face was a careful mask of professional sympathy, but her eyes were tired. I knew she had 3 more kids to process after me. Happy birthday, Ilara. The words were genuine, but they landed with a thud in the sterile room. As you know, you're officially an adult. The state's responsibility for your care is concluded. Concluded. Like a meeting. Like a boring movie. This envelope contains your birth certificate, your social security card, your final stipend check, and this. She separated a smaller, more legal-looking envelope from the stack. It was brittle with age, the paper yellowed to the color of old teeth. My name and a post office box address I didn't recognize were typed on the front. This was left in your grandmother's effects. The instructions were to give it to you on your 18th birthday. It's a deed. I just stared at it. Grandmother. The word was a ghost in my mouth. I had memories of her, but they were like fragments of a dream you can't quite hold on to. The smell of soil and rain, the rough feel of her hand, a low humming sound she'd make when she was working. She'd been my world for the first 6 years of my life. Then, one day, she was just gone. The official story was that she'd abandoned me, dropped me at a fire station with a note pinned to my jacket. For 12 years, that was the story I'd carried, a stone in my gut. Abandoned. A deed to what? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. A property, Ms. Albright said, consulting her file. 94 acres, a farmhouse, a barn, rural Route 4 outside of a town called Havenwood. It's been sitting vacant since she left. The property taxes have been paid anonymously from an account that was set up for that purpose. That account is now depleted. As of today, the property and any outstanding liabilities are yours. She paused, and her professional mask slipped for a second. A flicker of real pity crossed her face. Ilara, the reports I was able to pull, they aren't good. The place is listed as derelict. The town has liens against it for non-maintenance. It's probably not worth anything. There's an offer on the table, though. A development company has been trying to buy up the land in that area for years. They're offering $10,000 for the deed. It's not much, but it's a start. More than most kids get. $10,000. It sounded like $1 million. It was a bus ticket to anywhere. It was first and last month's rent on a tiny apartment. It was a future. A clean break. All I had to do was sign a paper, and the last broken piece of my past would be gone. I could walk out of this office and never look back. It was the smart thing to do. It was the sensible thing to do. So why did I hear a low humming sound in the back of my mind? Why did I suddenly smell rain on dry dirt? "I want to see it," I said. The words surprised me as much as they did Ms. Albright. She blinked. "Ilara, there's nothing to see. The assessment says the house is probably unsalvageable. The land is fallow. It's just dirt." "I want to see the dirt," I said, my hand closing around the brittle envelope. It felt warm, somehow, alive. She sighed, a long, weary exhalation of institutional air. "The bus to Havenwood leaves at 2 p.m. It's a 6-hour ride."
From there, I don't know. It's rural.
She pushed the developer's offer across the desk. "This offer is good for 30 days. Call me if you change your mind. Call me anyway." I nodded, stuffing the papers into the worn backpack that held everything I owned: 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and a paperback I'd read a dozen times. As I stood in the doorway, about to step out into the rest of my life, Ms. Albright said my name one last time. "Ilara, be careful. Places like that, they have a way of holding on to things." The bus ride was a long, rumbling meditation on the color gray. Gray city, gray highway, gray sky. I watched the world I knew, the world of concrete and sirens and crowded sidewalks, dissolve into the green and brown of the countryside. 2 years of group homes in the city. 2 years of learning to make myself small, to be invisible. 2 years of sleeping in a room with 3 other girls, all of us dreaming of escape. 2 years of staring out of windows, wondering about the woman who had given me my first memories and my first wound. Abandoned. The word echoed with the rhythm of the wheels on the pavement. Why? It was the question that had shaped my entire life. Was I too much trouble? Too loud? Not good enough? The social workers had theories. They said my grandmother was poor, unwell, desperate. They said it was an act of last resort love. But for a 6-year-old crying in a sterile intake room, it felt like anything but love. It felt like being thrown away. I clutched the envelope with the deed. It was the only thing that connected me to her now. A piece of paper for a piece of land. A dead farm. Maybe Ms. Albright was right. Maybe I was on a fool's errand, chasing a ghost into the middle of nowhere. The $10,000 felt like a weight in my backpack, a sensible voice whispering, "Go back. Start your life. This is not your problem." But another, quieter voice, a voice that sounded like humming, whispered back, "You're almost home." As the sun began to set, staining the gray sky with streaks of orange and purple, the bus pulled into Havenwood. Town was a generous word. It was a crossroads, mostly. A gas station with a convenience store, a post office, a diner with a flickering neon sign, and a handful of houses with peeling paint. The bus hissed to a stop, the doors folded open, and the driver grunted. End of the line. I was the only one who got off. The bus pulled away, its red taillights shrinking into the twilight, leaving me in a profound and intimidating silence, broken only by the chirping of crickets. The air was different here. It was thick with the smell of damp earth, of growing things, and something else, something clean and cold. It smelled like the color of the sky just before a storm. I walked into the diner. A bell on the door announced my arrival with a cheerful jingle that felt out of place. A handful of men in work boots and flannel shirts sat at the counter, the conversations dropping to a murmur as they turned to look at me. I was clearly not from around here. A woman with a tired face and a kind smile wiped down the counter. "Help you, hun?" "I need to get to rural Route 4, I said, my voice feeling too loud in the quiet room. "The old Blackwood place." The murmur at the counter stopped completely. Every eye was on me. The woman's smile tightened. Ain't nobody lived out there for more than a decade. What business you got with the Blackwood place? Her tone wasn't unkind, just wary, protective. It's mine, I said, and the absurdity of the words hit me. Mine. I, who had never owned anything that couldn't fit in a backpack, owned 94 acres of derelict land. One of the men at the counter, an old man with a face like a road map, spoke up. That place has a long shadow, girl. You sure you want to stand in it? I just want to see it, I repeated. The woman sighed.
My husband, Joe, runs the town's only taxi. He's out on a run to the next county. He'll be back in an hour or so. Sit, have some coffee. It's on the house. An hour later, I was in the passenger seat of a rattling pickup truck that smelled of oil and coffee. Joe was a man of few words. He'd listened to my request, nodded once, and said, "Get in." We drove out of the small circle of light cast by the town and into a deep, velvety darkness. The headlights cut a tunnel through a black world. There were no streetlights, no other cars, just the road and the dense, dark woods pressing in on either side. Your grandmother was Maeve Blackwood? He asked suddenly, his voice a low rumble. Yes, I said, surprised he knew her name. She was a force of nature, that one, he said, a small, sad smile touching his lips. Kept to herself, mostly, but she was tough. Saw the world in a way most folks don't. He fell silent again, and we drove on. The paved road turned to gravel, and the gravel turned to a rutted dirt track. The truck bounced and jostled, and tree branches scraped against the windows like skeletal fingers. Finally, he pulled to a stop. This is as far as I go, he said. The lane's too washed out for the truck. In the high beams, I could see a collapsing wooden gate hanging from a single hinge. Beyond it, a dark shape loomed against the starry sky. The farmhouse. You sure about this? Joe asked, his voice soft with concern. Place has been empty a long time. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I handed him a $20 bill from my stipend. He tried to refuse it, but I insisted. You need a ride back to town, you'll have to walk, he said. No cell service out here. You get in trouble, you'll be on your own. He waited until I was through the gate, then with a final, hesitant look, he reversed the truck and drove away, his taillights disappearing back into the dark woods. And then I was alone, utterly, completely alone. The silence rushed back in, deeper this time. It was the silence of a place that had forgotten the sound of human voices. I took a breath of the cold, clean air and walked up the lane toward the house. My house. The house was a silhouette of sorrow against the night sky. The porch sagged like a tired mouth, the roofline was swayed, and several windows were dark, vacant eyes. The moonlight painted it in shades of silver and black, making it look both more beautiful and more terrifying. I didn't try to go inside. Not yet. The keys Miss Albright had given me felt heavy and useless in my pocket. Instead, I walked the perimeter. The grass was knee-high, and my feet were soon soaked with dew. Behind the house, there was a barn, larger than the house itself, its great doors bolted shut, its form a hulking, patient beast in the darkness. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. This place was a wreck. It was a disaster. It was everything they said it was. But it was real. It was solid. It was mine. I wasn't ready to face the ghosts inside the house, so I curled up on the least rotted corner of the porch, my backpack for a pillow, and watched the stars come out. They were brighter here than I had ever seen them. A dense, glittering spill of diamonds on black velvet. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was in a place that was big enough to hold all my questions. I didn't sleep much. I just watched and listened to the night sounds. The wind in the tall grass, the call of an owl,
the creak and groan of the old house settling. It didn't sound like a dead place. It sounded like a place that was waiting for me. The sun rose, and the farm revealed itself in the unforgiving light of morning. It was worse than I'd imagined. The paint on the house was peeling in long strips like sunburnt skin. The porch steps were a trap of rotting wood. The fields were overgrown with weeds and thorny brambles. It was a monument to neglect, a testament to decay. Any rational person would have walked away, called Ms. Albright, and taken the $10,000. But as I stood there, watching the morning mist burn off the fields, I felt a stubborn root of defiance take hold in my chest. This was the last thing she had touched, the last place she had been. Walking away felt like abandoning her all over again. I started with the house. The key, surprisingly, worked in the front door lock. It turned with a loud, grating screech, and the door swung inward on a gust of stale, musty air. The inside was a time capsule of abandonment. A layer of dust coated everything like a fine gray snow. Furniture stood draped in white sheets, like a congregation of ghosts. In the kitchen, a calendar on the wall was still turned to a month 12 years ago. I spent the morning just walking through the rooms, touching things, trying to feel some connection. It was her house, but it didn't feel like a home. It felt like a stage that had been abruptly cleared. There was nothing personal left. No photos, no clothes in the closets, no books on the shelves. It had been scrubbed clean of her presence. It felt deliberate. It felt like another layer of abandonment, a calculated erasure. By afternoon, a cold, persistent drizzle had started to fall, turning the world outside the grimy windows into a watercolor of greens and grays. My initial burst of defiant energy had faded, replaced by a hollow ache of disappointment. What was I even doing here? I was just a tourist in my own sad history. There was nothing here for me but dust and decay. The developer's offer letter was a siren song in my mind. $10,000. A new life. Away from all this. I decided to check the barn before I gave up completely. The big doors were swollen shut, sealed by years of damp and neglect. A smaller side door was also stuck fast. I put my shoulder to it and pushed, again and again, my frustration mounting with each useless shove. Finally, with a cry of anger, I kicked it, hard, right next to the handle. There was a crack of splintering wood, and the door shuddered open a few inches. I slipped inside. The air in the barn was cool and smelled of hay, dust, and time. Shafts of light cut through gaps in the roof, illuminating swirling dust motes like tiny galaxies. It was vast. The main floor was empty except for a few rotting hay bales and a rusted-out tractor that looked like the skeleton of some prehistoric animal. It was just another empty space, another disappointment. I was about to leave when I saw it. In the far back corner, partially hidden by a pile of collapsed shelving and old tarps, was a door. But it wasn't a door to the outside. It was a door in the floor. It was made of thick, dark wood, almost black, and bound with straps of iron. It had no handle, just a heavy iron ring set flush with the wood. It was a cellar door. But it was wrong. Every farmhouse had a root cellar, usually a simple stone-lined pit accessed from the kitchen or an outside hatch. This was different. This was in the back of the barn, hidden away. It was heavy, fortified. It looked less like a door to a cellar and more like a door to a vault. My heart started to beat a little faster. This was not on any of the county assessments. This was not part of a normal farm. This was hidden. This was secret. The ring was cold and heavy in my hand. I pulled. Nothing. It was sealed tight. I pulled again, bracing my feet against the floor, my muscles straining. It didn't budge. It was as if it were fused to the floor. I searched the barn for something to use as a lever. I found a long iron pry bar, its surface pitted with rust. I wedged the tip under the edge of the door and put all my weight on it. The wood groaned. The metal of the pry bar creaked in protest. For a moment, nothing happened.
Then, with a deafening crack that echoed through the cavernous barn, something gave way. The door lifted a few inches, releasing a puff of air that smelled different from the rest of the barn. It was dry, cool, and clean. It smelled of paper and metal and something faintly chemical. With the seal broken, the door was still incredibly heavy, but I could move it. Grunting with effort, I heaved it open and propped it against the wall. A set of steep, narrow wooden steps led down into perfect darkness. A shiver ran down my spine, a mixture of fear and exhilarating curiosity. This was it. This was the thing I had been looking for, even if I hadn't known it. This was the secret. Taking a deep breath, I started down the steps, my hand trailing along the cool, smooth stone of the wall. The steps ended on a clean, poured concrete floor. I fumbled along the wall until my fingers found a switch. I flicked it. Nothing happened. Of course, the power had been off for 12 years. I went back up, retrieved a flashlight from my backpack, and descended again. The beam of the flashlight cut through the darkness, and I gasped. This was no root cellar. It was a room. A clean, dry, well-organized workshop. One wall was lined with shelves holding neatly labeled jars of powders and minerals. Another had drafting tables and blueprints pinned to the wall, covered in complex diagrams and chemical formulas. In the center of the room was a large, heavy-duty workbench. On it sat a potter's wheel, covered in a canvas cloth. And against the far wall, there was a small, powerful-looking electric kiln. The place was pristine, untouched by the decay that had consumed everything else on the farm. It was a hermetically sealed secret. My flashlight beam fell on a metal footlocker tucked under one of the drafting tables. It was an old army green box, secured with a simple padlock. Next to it on the floor was a small, rust-pitted hammer. It felt like a test, an invitation. I picked up the hammer. The lock was old. It only took 3 sharp blows before the shackle snapped. My hands were trembling as I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, there was no treasure, no gold, no jewels, just paper, stacks of it. And on top of the first stack, there was a single, thick envelope with my name, Elara, written on it in a strong, familiar hand. My heart stopped. It was her handwriting. I knew it instantly from the one birthday card I had from my 5th birthday, a card I had kept hidden in the bottom of my bag for 13 years. With shaking fingers, I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The paper was crisp, the ink a dark, unfaded blue. "My dearest Elara," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are a woman grown. And I have a lifetime of apologies to begin with. The first and most important is for leaving you. I know you will have grown up believing I abandoned you. In the eyes of the world, that is exactly what I did. I need you to know it was the hardest and most necessary thing I have ever done. It was the only way to protect you. It was the only way to save this place for you. I had to stop reading. The words were a punch to the gut. I sat down hard on the cold concrete floor, the flashlight beam wavering, my breath coming in ragged sobs. All the anger, all the hurt, all the years of feeling unwanted and thrown away came rushing to the surface. I cried for the 6-year-old girl left at the fire station. I cried for the teenager who learned to trust no one. I cried for the woman I was supposed to become, built on a foundation of lies. It was a storm of grief, a 12-year flood held back by a dam of sheer survival. And here, in this secret room, the dam finally broke. I don't know how long I sat there, curled up on the floor, the letter clutched in my hand. It could have been minutes or an hour. The world outside the cellar, the rain, the decaying farm, the developer's offer, all of it ceased to exist. There was only the concrete, the darkness, and the words on the page. And listen, if you've ever been hit by a truth that rewrites your whole life,
a truth that makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself and the people you love. Then you know the feeling. It's like the ground falling out from under you. But sometimes you fall into a new place, a place that's more real, a place where you can finally start to build. This is for you. This story, and all the stories we tell here, are for the people who have had the ground fall out from under them and are trying to find their footing again. That's why we build this community here. So thank you for being a part of it. Slowly, the tears subsided, leaving me empty and strangely calm. I picked up the flashlight and read on, my voice a raw whisper in the silent room. There was a debt, little star, she wrote.
Not my debt, but one that was attached to this land like a sickness. Your great-grandfather, in his desperation during a drought, signed a terrible contract with a mining company. He sold them the mineral rights to this land for a pittance, but the contract had a clause, a snake in the grass. It said that if the land ever produced anything of unique geological value, they owned it. For decades, it meant nothing. This was just a failing farm. But then I found it. I was a geologist before I was a farmer, Alara. That was my secret. And I found a secret in our soil. My eyes scanned the room, the jars of minerals, the blueprints. It was all starting to make a terrifying kind of sense. Deep under the north pasture, there's a vein of kaolin clay. But it's not just any clay, it has a unique crystalline structure. It fires at a lower temperature, and it produces a porcelain of impossible strength and translucence. It's a geological miracle. It's a potter's dream. It's worth millions. I made the mistake of sending a sample for analysis. The company that held the old contract, a new corporation now, a ruthless one called Viridian Development, they found out. They came to me. They offered me a pittance to walk away. When I refused, they threatened me. They said they would use the contract to take the land, the house, everything. And then they threatened you. They knew I was raising my granddaughter alone. They saw you as leverage, a weakness. I couldn't fight them in court. I had no money. I had no power. But I had a secret. I knew the land better than they did. So I enacted a desperate plan. I made it look like I had abandoned you. I knew the state would take you in, keep you safe in a way I no longer could. It broke my heart into 1,000 pieces, Alara, but I knew you were resilient. You were a survivor. I erased myself from the farm, took anything personal, made it look worthless. I set up the anonymous account to pay the taxes, just enough to keep the state from seizing it, but not enough to attract attention. I built this cellar, this ark, and I hid my research, my work, the truth of this land, down here. I left the farm to die, so that one day you could bring it back to life. The contract your great-grandfather signed has a statute of limitations, a termination clause. It expires on your 18th birthday. On that day, the debt is wiped clean. The mineral rights revert to the landowner, to you. Viridian Development knows this. That's why they are offering you $10,000. They are hoping the abandoned girl will be desperate enough to sell her birthright for a bus ticket. They are betting that you don't know what you're standing on. The choice is yours, Alara. You can take their money. I would not blame you. You owe this place nothing. Or you can stay. You can fight. You can finish what I started. Inside this box, you will find all my research, my firing schedules, the geological surveys. You will also find a key to a safe deposit box in Havenwood. In it is enough cash to last you 6 months and to file the necessary legal claims to secure the land. It's not much, but it's a start. This farm is not an inheritance of wealth, my darling. It is an inheritance of purpose. It is a chance. Choose wisely. All my love, forever, your grandmother, Maeve. I let the letter fall into my lap. The silence in the cellar was no longer empty. It was filled with her voice, her love, her sacrifice. She hadn't abandoned me. She had protected me. She had given up everything, her home, her life's work, her only family, to give me this one impossible chance.
The weight of the last 12 years shifted. The stone in my gut wasn't a stone of abandonment. It was a seed of hope, of purpose, of legacy. And on this day, in this secret room, it had finally been watered. I looked at the developer's offer, which I had stuffed into my pocket. $10,000. It was blood money. It was an insult. I took out my lighter, the one I kept for emergencies, and I set the corner of the letter on fire. I watched the crisp paper blacken and curl, the words of the offer turning to ash. It was a small, symbolic act, but it felt like a vow, a declaration of war. I wasn't the scared, lonely girl who had gotten off the bus yesterday. I was Maeve Blackwood's granddaughter, and this was my land. The next morning, I walked the 5 miles back to Havenwood. The sun was out, the air was clean, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged under this wide open sky. My first stop was the post office, which also served as the town's only bank. The man behind the counter was the same old man who had been in the diner, the one with the face like a road map. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. "Came back," he said. It wasn't a question. "I need to access a safe deposit box," I said, placing the small, tarnished key my grandmother had left me on the counter. He looked at the key, then at me. A slow smile spread across his weathered face. "I'll be damned," he said softly. "Maeve's key. We've been holding this for 12 years. She told me a girl with her eyes would come for it one day." He led me into a small vault. The box was heavy. Inside, just as the letter promised, were neat stacks of cash and a thick folder of legal documents. There was also a small, velvet pouch. I opened it. A single, exquisitely crafted porcelain bird lay in my palm. It was thin as an eggshell, impossibly delicate, and it seemed to glow from within. It was the first thing made from the farm's secret clay. My next stop was a payphone outside the diner. I called Ms. Albright. "Ilara, are you okay?" "Did you decide to take the offer?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "I'm not taking the offer," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I'm keeping the farm, and I'm going to need a lawyer, a good one, a pro bono one if you can find them. I'm filing a claim to secure my mineral rights and a restraining order against Viridian Development for harassment." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, for the first time, I heard Ms. Albright laugh. It was a real, genuine laugh. "Okay, Ilara," she said, and her voice was filled with a new kind of respect. "Okay, let's get to work." The final stop was the hardware store. It was a dusty, wonderful place that smelled of sawdust and metal. I bought a new lock for the cellar, a set of heavy-duty chains for the main gate, work gloves, cleaning supplies, and a new set of spark plugs for the old tractor in the barn. I spent almost all the cash I had on me. The man behind the counter, who introduced himself as George, tallied up my purchases. "Big plans for the old Blackwood place?" he asked, his eyes curious. "Just cleaning up," I said. As he handed me my change, he added, "You need a hand with that tractor, you let me know. My boy's a whiz with old engines, no charge. Maeve. She was a good neighbor." I walked out of the store into the afternoon sun, my arms loaded with supplies, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The days that followed blurred into a routine of hard, satisfying work. The first task was to secure the place. I put the new lock on the cellar, the one place that was truly mine, a sanctuary of truth. I chained and padlocked the main gate with a new, hand-painted sign that read, "No trespassing." It was a small act of defiance, but it felt monumental. Then, the cleaning began. I started with the house. I threw open the windows, letting the fresh air chase out the ghosts of stale time. I pulled the sheets off the furniture and beat the dust out of them in the yard.
watching the gray clouds of the past dissipate into the blue sky. I scrubbed floors, washed windows, and patched holes in the walls. With each task, the house felt less like a tomb and more like a home. The work was grueling, my muscles ached, my hands were raw and blistered. But every night, I would fall into the old bed in my grandmother's room, exhausted and sore, but with a sense of accomplishment I had never known. I was not just cleaning a house, I was reclaiming a life. Ms. Albright was true to her word. She found me a lawyer, a young, fiery woman from a legal aid society who specialized in land rights. Her name was Sarah, and she was furious and thrilled by my story in equal measure. She filed the paperwork to secure my mineral rights and sent a blistering cease and desist letter to Viridian Development. The response was swift. A black SUV appeared at my gate one afternoon. A man in an expensive suit got out. He didn't try to come in. He just stood at the gate, his arms crossed, staring at the house. He was there for an hour, a silent, menacing presence. Then he got back in his car and drove away. The next day, the official-looking letters started arriving. Threats of lawsuits, claims of prior ownership, notices of legal action. They were trying to intimidate me, to bury me in paper, to make me feel small and powerless. But they didn't know I had a secret. I had a cellar full of truth and a grandmother's love fueling my fight. I took their letters and used them as kindling to start the fire in the wood stove each night. While the legal battle raged in the background, I turned my attention to the barn and the cellar. George from the hardware store was as good as his word. His son, a quiet teenager named Liam, came out and spent a weekend tinkering with the old tractor. With a final cough of black smoke, the engine sputtered to life. The sound of it, a loud, rumbling heartbeat in the quiet landscape, felt like a victory. With the tractor, I could begin to tame the overgrown fields. I started with the land around the house, mowing down the weeds, clearing the brambles. It was slow, back-breaking work, but with each cleared patch, I felt like I was letting the land breathe again. My evenings were spent in the cellar, my grandmother's workshop. It was my sanctuary. I studied her blueprints, her chemical notes, her firing schedules. Her handwriting was everywhere, a constant, comforting presence. She was teaching me from beyond the grave. I learned about the unique properties of the clay, how it needed to be mixed, how it responded to heat. I learned the language of the earth. I started small. I found a bag of clay she had already processed, stored in an airtight container. My first attempts on the potter's wheel were a disaster. The clay wobbled, collapsed, and more often than not, ended up splattered on the walls. I was clumsy, frustrated, and felt like an imposter in her sacred space. But I remembered her words. You are resilient. You are a survivor. So every night, I cleaned up my mess, and every evening I came back and tried again. Slowly, my hands learned the rhythm of the wheel. I learned to center the clay, to feel its energy, to guide it rather than force it. I started to make simple bowls, lopsided and thick, but whole. They were ugly, but they were mine. One evening, as the autumn air grew crisp and the leaves on the trees began to turn to gold and fire, I decided I was ready. I prepared a small amount of clay exactly as her notes instructed. I sat at the wheel, and this time, I didn't try to make anything. I just listened. I listened to the hum of the wheel, the feel of the clay, the memory of my grandmother's humming. And my hands moved. I wasn't thinking, I was just feeling. When I was done, a small, delicate bowl sat on the wheel. It was thin, symmetrical, and graceful. It was the best thing I had ever made. With trembling hands, I carried it to the kiln. I followed her firing schedule precisely, my heart pounding with every tick of the timer. The hours of waiting were the longest of my life. Finally, it was time. I let the kiln cool, my stomach in knots. Had I done it right? Had I ruined the last of her prepared clay? I opened the door. The bowl sat in the center of the shelf, and it was glowing. It wasn't hot, it was a trick of the light.
The porcelain was so pure, so translucent, that it captured the ambient light and seemed to radiate it back out. It was even more beautiful than the little bird in the velvet pouch. It was proof. Proof of the land's secret. Proof of my grandmother's genius. And proof that I was in the right place, doing the right thing. I held the bowl in my hands. It was warm, strong, and impossibly light. And in that moment, I knew. I wasn't just fighting for a piece of land. I was fighting for a legacy. I was not just Maeve Blackwood's granddaughter. I was her partner. And our work had just begun. The first bowl became my talisman. I kept it on the kitchen table where I could see it every day. It was a reminder of what was possible. It was a promise. The legal battle with Viridian dragged on, but with the bowl as physical evidence of the clay's unique properties, our case grew stronger. Sarah, my lawyer, was relentless. She found a precedent in an old water rights case that helped invalidate the original contract's overreach. The tide was turning. The news of my fight and the rediscovery of the Blackwood clay started to spread through Havenwood. People who had once looked at me with suspicion now offered words of encouragement. George from the hardware store extended me a line of credit. The woman from the diner started dropping off hot meals on my doorstep. Joe, the taxi driver, would bring my mail and supplies up the lane so I wouldn't have to walk into town. I was no longer the outsider. I was becoming part of the fabric of the community. They were protecting one of their own. One day, Liam, the tractor whisperer, showed up with a pickup truck full of his friends. They spent the entire weekend helping me clear the north pasture, the one that sat above the vein of clay. They worked for nothing more than sandwiches and the satisfaction of helping a neighbor. As we worked, laughing and sweating under the autumn sun, I realized something profound. My grandmother had isolated herself to protect her secret. But I couldn't succeed that way. My strength wasn't in isolation, it was in connection. It was in the community that was slowly, cautiously, wrapping its arms around me. The farm was coming back to life, not just because of my work, but because of the kindness of others. Winter arrived, blanketing the farm in a thick layer of snow. The world grew quiet. The legal fight was paused for the holidays, and the heavy work on the land was impossible. It was a time for introspection, for planning. I spent my days in the cellar, not just as a student, but as an artist. I experimented. I failed. I learned. I filled shelves with my lopsided creations, and with each one, I felt my grandmother's spirit beside me, encouraging me. One snowy evening, there was a knock on the door. It was Ms. Albright. I hadn't seen her in person since that day in her office. She stood on my newly repaired porch, a thermos of coffee in one hand and a thick file in the other. "I was in the area visiting another client," she said, her smile reaching her eyes. I wanted to see it for myself. I gave her a tour, the clean house, the warm kitchen, the humming cellar. I showed her the bowl. She held it in her hands, her professional demeanor melting away into pure awe. "You did it, Alara," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You really did it." We sat at the kitchen table, drinking coffee, and she opened her file. "The final hearing is in January," she said. "Viridian is offering to settle, a substantial amount, enough to set you up for life, anywhere you want to go." For a moment, the old fear, the old insecurity, flickered inside me. A lifetime of safety, a clean break. But then I looked at the bowl on the table, glowing in the lamplight. I looked out the window at the snow-covered fields, my fields, sleeping and waiting for spring. "This is where I want to be," I said. "Tell them no, we're going to trial." The trial was short. Sarah presented the history, the fraudulent contract, my grandmother's letters, and finally, the bowl. When she placed it on the witness stand, a hush fell over the courtroom. It was more eloquent than any legal argument. It was the truth, made tangible. We won. The judge not only affirmed my ownership of the land and its mineral rights, but also opened an investigation into Viridian's predatory practices. It was a total victory. That night, the entire town of Havenwood seemed to be waiting for me at the diner. They cheered when I walked in. They had followed the story, prayed for me, and now they were celebrating with me. I wasn't just the girl who owned the Blackwood place anymore. I was Alara. Just Alara. Life settled into a new rhythm. The rhythm of the seasons, of the earth, of creation. The farm became Blackwood pottery. I started small, selling my pieces at the local farmer's market. The story of the clay, of my grandmother, was as compelling as the pottery itself. The orders started coming in. First from neighboring towns, then from galleries in the city. I had to hire Liam part-time to help with the land and the heavy lifting. I turned one of the spare rooms in the house into an office and a shipping station. The farm was no longer just a home. It was a business, a thriving one. It was hard work, but it was joyful work. I was not just making a living, I was making a life my grandmother had dreamed of for me. I was honoring her sacrifice with every piece of clay I shaped. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I walk out to the edge of the north pasture, the place where it all began. I stand there and look back at the farmhouse, its windows glowing with warm light. I see the barn, no longer a tomb, but a workshop. I smell the wood smoke from my chimney, and I feel the solid earth beneath my feet. This place is not an inheritance of money. It's an inheritance of resilience. It taught me that home isn't a place you are given, but a place you create. It's built not with wood and nails, but with love, with purpose, and with the courage to face the ghosts of the past and build a future. My grandmother left me a broken-down farm, but she also left me a map, a mission, and the greatest gift of all, a second chance. She saved the land for me, and in doing so, she saved me. And I like to think that somewhere, she is watching and she is humming. This journey taught me that some things look like an ending when they are really a beginning in disguise. Abandonment can be a form of protection. A dead end can be a new path waiting to be discovered. And a legacy isn't about what you're left, it's about what you choose to build. So I want to ask you, what has this story taught you about inheritance? What have you been given, not of money, but of spirit, that you are building on today? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, because your stories, your struggles, and your victories are what make this community what it is. You are not alone in your fight. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for sharing this journey with me. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe. There are so many more stories to tell.